So get this, our HOA president straight up kicks in the door of my cabin right while I'm sitting there having a beer with the state's attorney general. She literally commits 6 felonies in front of the one guy in the country who could personally throw her in prison. I'm talking splintered wood flying everywhere, her designer heels crunching across broken glass, the whole dramatic entrance. She comes storming in wearing a $1,000 blazer, reeking of some heavy-handed perfume that probably costs more than my truck payment, screaming about rules and jurisdiction like she's the queen of the county. No idea who she just barged in on. No idea she's basically live-streaming her own arrest warrant to 3,000 people. 6 months earlier, I figured Corinne was just your average power-drunk neighbor. Turns out, she was running a $4 million embezzlement ring and I was about to burn her whole operation to the ground completely by accident. What would you do if some HOA tyrant busted into your private property during the most important meeting of your life? Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I bet half of you have crossed paths with these neighborhood dictators before. Let me rewind to how this nightmare even started. 6 months ago, life was damn near perfect. Name's Marcus Henley. I'm 52. After 3 decades of crawling through muddy ditches, wiring up power grids across 3 counties, I finally hung up the tools and retired. My prize, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake, 2 acres of heaven that he picked up back in 1963 for $800. Can you believe that? $800 for waterfront land that's worth more than most people's houses now. This wasn't some shiny McMansion either. It was hand-cut logs, a stone fireplace Pop built himself, and a screened-in porch that creaked exactly where it should. I kept it fully off-grid, solar panels humming, well water that tasted like childhood, and a septic system that ran smoother than any city sewer I'd seen. Every morning, the fog rolling off the lake reminded me why Pop had chosen this place. He used to say, "The land chooses you, not the other way around." He also warned me, "Marcus, if someone wants your land real bad, figure out why. It's usually worth a hell of a lot more than they're letting on." Then she showed up. Delilah Cromwell, though everyone just called her the HOA psycho, blew into our quiet lake community like a designer-clad tornado. 58, fresh out of some California subdivision where bossing people around was apparently a full-time job. She drove a pearl-white Escalade with vanity plates that literally said Rule 1, not making that up, and she wore her HOA president badge on her blazer like it was a sheriff's star. Her mission: turn our rustic lakefront into what she called an upscale resort community. Didn't take long for me to notice something strange. Within 2 months of her arrival, 3 elderly couples had already sold their cabins. Coincidence? Maybe, but it felt off. Her first shot across the bow came on a Tuesday morning. I'm on Pop's porch, sipping coffee and watching a pair of loons teach their chicks to dive, when I hear the sharp click of heels on my dock. Designer heels, at 7 in the morning, on my private property. 10 minutes later, she's taping some official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation. Unsightly dock structure lowering community property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required in 72 hours. Daily penalties after that. I had to read it twice. My old dock, the same one Pop and I rebuilt when I was 12, was apparently dragging down the neighborhood's real estate market. So I walk over, figuring we can talk this out. My land predates the HOA by 40 years, after all. You know what she says to me, standing there in my driveway, hands on her hips like she owns the ground. "Everybody on this lake answers to me. Sweetie, ask the Hendersons how fighting me turned out for them." The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors who'd suddenly decided to downsize last month after living here 23 years. The pieces weren't fitting yet, but I felt something cold settle in my gut. Then she whips out her phone, circling my cabin like an appraiser, snapping photos of my solar panels, my garden, even Pop's hand-carved porch railing. The chemical stench rolling out of her Escalade made me gag. By the end of the week, I had 3 more citations, each with steeper fines. It was obvious. Delilah Cromwell had declared war on everything my family built here. I figured it was just a typical case of an HOA nut on a power trip. Annoying, sure, but survivable. What I didn't realize was that I'd just painted a target on my back in something way bigger than neighborhood politics. Pop's words echoed in my head, "Find out why they want your land." And I was about to find out why. She didn't waste time cranking things up. 3 days after my compliance deadline passed, because no way was I tearing down Pop's dock for some wannabe dictator, I get a certified letter that turned my morning coffee to ash. Cease and desist. Violation of community waterway regulations. The letterhead, Blackstone, Meyer and Associates. One of those firms that probably bills more in an hour than I used to make in a month. The legal jargon basically accused my dock of illegally jutting into community waterway. Retroactive fees, $3,000. Failure to pay. They'd slap a lien on my property in 10 days. My gut reaction, panic. They had lawyers. I had a toolbox and a bad attitude. But then I remembered what Pop drilled into me during long fishing trips. Marcus, whenever someone tries to lawyer you out of your land, the truth's always buried in the county records. Don't trust their papers, go dig up the real ones. So, I drove to the courthouse basement, where decades of dust covered the stuff that actually matters. Betty, a kind clerk who still remembered Pop from his fishing tournaments, helped me pull the original surveys. Old Union habit: always check the source before you let some suit bluff you. What I found made my blood boil. My grandfather's deed didn't stop at the shoreline, it went 50 feet into the lake. Stamped and sealed, 1963. My dock wasn't trespassing on community property. It was sitting square in the middle of my lake. And here's the kicker. The HOA wasn't even founded until 1998, 35 years after Pop bought his land. My old foreman used to say, older deeds often carry rights newer developments can't touch. Turns out he was dead right. Armed with copies, I headed back to the cabin feeling unstoppable. That lasted right up until I tried to run to the store and found her Escalade parked sideways across my driveway. Not beside it, blocking it, like a one-woman police checkpoint. I knock on the window. She cracks it just enough to talk. Oh, Marcus, I'm just reviewing parking regulations. Could take a while. The low hum of her idling engine mixed with that sickly air freshener made the whole scene feel insane. Here I was, a man who helped wire half the county, being held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban control freak. And she was just warming up. Within a week, she'd created something called the Lakeside Beautification Committee. Sounds nice, except it was basically a hit squad for anyone who didn't fit her country club vision. Neighbors who'd waved at me for decades suddenly crossed the street to avoid me. Her Facebook posts were masterclasses in passive-aggressive warfare, concerned about certain eyesore properties hurting our values. Throw in hashtags like hashtag Lakeside Strong and hashtag Property Values, and the comment section turned into a mob. People I'd known for years were parroting her talking points, like she was some kind of prophet. 3 neighbors even apologized to me in private. Tom and Susan Martinez stopped me on my evening walk, pulling me aside with worried looks. They admitted that Karen had leaned on them either lodge a complaint against my property or face a flood of citations themselves. Apparently, she'd already gone after old Mr. Peterson over his non-compliant flower boxes and threatened the young couple with the baby about their unsafe playset. She's got dirt on everybody, Tom whispered, eyes darting around like Karen might leap out of the shrubs with a camera. Then he dropped the kicker: her husband worked at the state capitol, tied into politics. That felt like ice water down my spine. This wasn't petty neighborhood squabbling anymore. This woman had influence that reached well past our lakeside community. That same night, I found my mailbox defaced in thick orange spray paint. Harsh slashes spelled out comply or leave. Luckily, my solar-powered security cam hidden in a pine tree caught it all: Karen's car, her license plate, and her driving off at 2:30 a.m. when I reported it the next morning. Who do you think the sheriff's office sent? Deputy Chad Cromwell, Karen's nephew. He glanced at the damage, shrugged, and said, probably just kids messing around. You know how they are. Running my hand over that rough paint as I tried to scrub it off felt like dragging sandpaper across my soul. Pop used to say, sometimes small fights need big guns. Time to bring in the big ones. And sure enough, Karen's next move hit harder. She traded open hostility for a cloak of civic duty. The first knock came from Building Inspector Dale Morrison, a guy I'd worked with plenty of times before. His uneasy face told the story before he opened his mouth. Marcus, I hate to do this, but I gotta complain about unpermitted structures here. Gotta follow it up. 3 hours later, after crawling through every corner of my cabin with a clipboard and measuring tape, his verdict was clear. Not only up to code but above current safety standards. Pop might have been old school, but he built to last. Shaking his head, Dale muttered, whoever filed this either doesn't know what They're talking about where they're just trying to waste everyone's time. Next day, Environmental Officer Janet Bennett showed up about alleged septic leaks into the lake. Everything checked out better than most new installs, she admitted. Then Fire Marshal Bob Rodriguez dropped in, inspecting my solar setup for fire hazards. Again, clean. Each visit stole another day from me, another piece of my peace. Worse, each bogus report left behind official paperwork, slowly painting me as a problem neighbor. My old union rep used to warn us bureaucratic harassment looks legitimate on paper, even when it's pure malice. While I was dealing with the inspection circus, Karen was polishing her public image. Channel 7 ran a community spotlight on her, casting her as a noble citizen protecting our lake. The footage was infuriating, cropped photos making my cabin look like a shack, her dramatic claims about unsafe conditions threatening kids, and her standing on my dock, calling it an illegal structure, while giving her performance for the cameras. The fallout was instant. My phone lit up with angry texts from neighbors who saw the segment. Half the lake now thought I was some reckless menace. But Karen overplayed her hand. My old buddy Jake Martinez from the electricians union saw the story and called me, "Marcus, that lady's full of it, and everyone knows it. You built half the clean energy grid in this county." I use your solar setup as a training example. Within 2 days, Jake rallied a crew of electricians, 20 masters who drove by and publicly vouched for my work. That narrative about hazardous electricals crumbled fast. Then things took a turn. My lawyer friend Chuck Davis, an old high school buddy, came by for a beer and dropped a bomb. "You know, Marcus, the Attorney General's been investigating HOA corruption." "What you're describing matches the pattern." I asked what he meant, though I already suspected. He laid it out: elderly homeowners hit with bogus citations, values driven down, and properties scooped up by cash buyers. Ring any bells? It rang every bell I had. Chuck explained the scheme: political connections shielding harassment while developers profited. "The AG's office is looking for witnesses," he said. "People with documentation, someone like you." The low hum of my fridge felt deafening as that sank in. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry neighbor. She might be part of something far bigger. That night, I started logging everything: every visit, every false report, every official knock at my door. I dug deeper into Karen's background, too. Turned out her husband, Robert Cromwell, wasn't some minor official. He was the state Democratic Party treasurer, sitting on development plans, zoning intel, and political favors across counties. The morning air and smell of coffee, usually calming, now reminded me of how much I stood to lose. This wasn't about HOA dues anymore. This was about being forced out for profit. Karen's next attack made everything before look like child's play. She went straight for my character. A Facebook post popped up: urgent safety concerns about aggressive behavior from lakefront resident. Keep kids away from the East Shore. Filing for protective measures. #HatchLakesify #protectourkids. Aggressive behavior. Me, the guy who ran the kids fishing derby for 15 years. Within hours, it had been shared over 40 times. The comments were brutal. People I'd never met branding me dangerous, feeding off Karen's crafted victim role. Some comments even came from obvious fake accounts, stock photo profiles, the kind political operatives used to stir outrage. She wasn't just spreading gossip. She was running a professional smear campaign. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order. The petition public record now painted me as unstable, threatening community leaders. Pure fiction. Judge Patricia Riss, who'd known my family for years, threw it out immediately for lack of evidence. But the damage was done. My name was now attached to threats in a court document. It was breaking me down. Evenings on Pop's porch, nursing a beer, I started asking myself if the fight was worth it. 30 years I'd worked for this retirement, and now it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Sitting in his old recliner didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt like the weight of a legacy someone was trying to erase. And then, just as I was thinking about quitting, the community pushed back. Retired Judge Bill Carter, Pop's fishing buddy from the 70s, showed up with a thermos of coffee and some blunt advice. "Marcus, your grandfather would have seen through this game. She wants you isolated. Don't give her that." He explained what I already sensed: harassment like this wasn't about petty grudges. It pointed to something bigger: money. Lots of it. Then, support started rolling in. My VFW post released a statement defending me, calling her attacks baseless against a decorated member. The Historical Society highlighted my cabin's cultural importance. Even the environmental group monitoring the lake praised my setup as a model of sustainability. For the first time in months, the bitterness gave way to hope. People were standing up, but Karen wasn't finished. Not even close. She convinced the utility company to investigate irregularities in my electrical service. I spent 3 days in the dark while they tore through my solar grid, only to find nothing wrong. Then came the false police reports, suspicious activity at my cabin, in broad daylight, noise complaints suggesting domestic fights when I lived alone, claims of drug activity because of the visitors who were union brothers showing support. Every call brought deputies to my door. Every visit left a new incident report. My file thickened with nonsense, each page making me look worse. And, almost every time, the responding officer was Deputy Chad Cromwell. He'd come by, ask a couple token questions, then leave with that smug grin, like he was in on the game. One day, he even said, "Mr. Henley, if you just apologized to my aunt and brought your place into compliance, all this would probably stop." That was the moment I understood this fight wasn't just mine anymore. Karen wasn't only targeting me, she was making an example out of me for everyone else. It suddenly made sense why the Hendersons, that sweet elderly couple, had so suddenly decided to sell. Chances are, they'd been dragged through the same nightmare. Even my phone stopped feeling like a lifeline. The ping of a new message no longer meant connection, it meant dread. Each alert could be another neighbor turning their back on me, another bogus complaint, another play at Karen's relentless mind games. And yet, mixed in with the poison were words of encouragement from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The war wasn't anywhere near finished, but for the first time, I was starting to see how the game was really played. The breakthrough came when I was doing something painfully dull, sorting through paperwork for a meeting Chuck had arranged with the Attorney General's office. He said they needed a full paper trail for the statewide investigation into corrupt HOAs. So there I was, at Pop's old oak table, buried under piles of citations, inspection slips, and threatening letters, when a small detail jumped out. One of Karen's violation notices carried a tiny footer I'd never noticed before: fines payable to Lakeside Estates Community Improvement Fund. Account number 847,291, Community Improvement Fund. It sounded proper enough, but something about it kept tugging at me. 30 years of reading electrical contracts had trained my eyes to catch the fine print, and this smelled off. I decided to dig. By then, the county clerk's office felt like my second home, and Betty already knew my routine. When I asked about HOA financial filings, she spread them across the counter like she was dealing cards. "Here's the deal, Marcus," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "HOAs have to file annual reports just like any business. Take a look at this." The numbers were a mess. Over 2 years, the HOA had pulled in $280,000 for emergency dock repairs that had never even started. Another $150,000 supposedly went to landscaping through Cromwell grounds and maintenance a company state records showed was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. And here's the kicker: the business had been created only 3 weeks after Karen took over as president. Pop's voice echoed in my mind. Follow the money. When someone launches a company right after getting authority, it's usually a funnel. And sure enough, the insurance claims made it even clearer. 3 separate filings for storm damage in just 18 months totaling $95,000. The problem: I'd lived through every storm, and not a single one was bad enough to justify those payouts. Betty and I cross-checked the claims with official weather reports. They didn't line up at all. The HOA was claiming damages on days that had been bright and sunny. Betty lowered her voice, though we were the only ones in the room. "Marcus, this looks like fraud. Plain and simple." My hands shook as I copied each page. The smooth paper felt like holding dynamite, evidence powerful enough to change everything. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. It was large-scale theft from the whole community. And then came the last piece of the puzzle. The HOA was paying $5,000 a month to a group called Clearwater Property Solutions for admin services. But when I checked the registration, the business address was nothing but a P.O. box right in the same district where Karen lived. That was it. Everything clicked into place. Karen's vendetta wasn't about ego or even control, it was about money. She was driving down property values to grease the wheels for a development scheme, all while siphoning cash from the HOA itself. The older couples who'd sold, they hadn't just been hounded, they'd been forced to unload their homes for far less than they were worth. While Karen's mysterious buyers swooped in, I thought of the Hendersons, probably counting pennies in some cramped apartment, never realizing they'd been robbed twice, once when they sold their home for scraps, and again through the fees that padded Karen's slush fund. Even my coffee tasted sour with the weight of it. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen was bleeding the entire community dry, even the neighbors who thought they were on her side. Pop had always warned that corruption runs deeper than you expect. He was right. Karen wasn't just running an HOA, she was running a racket. And I now held the evidence that could bring her down. That night, Pop's back bedroom turned into my version of a detective's war room. Maps of the lake covered the walls, showing property lines then and now. A timeline traced Karen's harassment alongside the suspicious financial moves. Photos, recordings, files sorted by possible charges. I felt less like a homeowner and more like one of those TV detectives, only instead of chasing killers, I was hunting a suburban embezzler. By morning, the Attorney General's office had sent two prosecutors to meet me, Sarah Mitchell and David Bennett. Sarah, sharp-eyed and serious, reminded me of the safety inspectors who used to keep us honest on the job. David was younger, early 30s at most, but he carried this calm intensity that made it clear he'd already put his share of white-collar criminals behind bars. Mr. Henley, Sarah said as she spread the financial records across Pop's dining table, what you've uncovered here isn't just petty HOA harassment. This is large-scale fraud that could harm dozens of families. David pulled out a tablet and began drawing connections I hadn't even considered. We've been chasing nearly identical schemes in for other counties, he explained. The pattern never changes. Politically connected players slide into HOA leadership, manipulate property values, and siphon off community funds. That's when they told me the FBI was already involved. Agent Rebecca Torres from the White-Collar Crime Unit had been following development fraud cases across the region. Turns out, my paperwork was the missing link tying several investigations together. The thing about financial crimes, Agent Torres said on our video call, is that the trail is always there. Your HOA's records show classic signs of money laundering, phony invoices, shell corporations, and insurance fraud. But paperwork alone isn't enough. We need witnesses and recordings of the crimes happening in real time. Meanwhile, my attorney friend Chuck had been digging quietly. He'd connected with 17 other lakefront families who'd endured the same harassment. When we gathered everyone at the VFW hall, their stories made my blood boil. The Thompsons had forked over $8,000 in bogus fines before selling their cabin at 30% below market value. The Garcias had been slammed with $12,000 in emergency assessments for lake projects that never happened. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived in her home for 43 years, had been bullied by Karen's legal threats until she moved in with her daughter. In Florida, every family's story followed the same playbook: ramped-up harassment, fabricated violations, pressure to sell, and all of them forced to contribute to the so-called Community Improvement Fund that was really just Karen's private stash. Here's what most people don't get about HOA fraud, explained Frank Faber, a retired accountant who volunteered to go through the numbers. If an HOA passes certain income thresholds, it must file Form 1120 with the IRS every year. Legitimate boards file without fail, corrupt ones avoided, because proper reporting would expose their theft. Frank discovered that our HOA hadn't filed accurate returns in more than 2 years despite pulling in hundreds of thousands in dues and assessments. That alone could spark federal tax evasion charges. The strategy session felt less like a neighborhood dispute and more like prepping for a military operation. We had financial records, witness testimony, audio recordings, and evidence of fraud. Still, Agent Torres wanted more. To nail this down tight, she said, we need Karen caught in the act. The strongest cases come when suspects incriminate themselves on camera. That's when Chuck pitched the perfect setup. The state attorney general was preparing to announce new HOA reform legislation. What if she held the press event at Marcus' cabin? Symbolically perfect, defending homeowner rights on the very property where those rights had been trampled. Sarah's eyes lit up. And if Karen sticks to her usual behavior, she won't be able to resist meddling. Her need for control will override her judgment. So we began preparing for what Torres called a controlled confrontation. We installed professional recording equipment hidden around my cabin. Undercover officers took up quiet positions around the lake. Several law enforcement agencies coordinated rapid response plans. The community coalition grew stronger. Local media was put on standby for breaking news. Social media campaigns were ready to block Karen's spin. Support networks were organized for the fallout. My old union training kicked in. You plan for every possible angle, and you always have backup for the backup. We had layers of contingency plans. The snare was set. Karen's behavior was so predictable, we could almost script it. All we had to do was wait for her to take the bait, and she did harder than we imagined. Sensing the walls closing in, her tactics escalated from harassment to outright sabotage. It was like watching a trapped animal thrash, more reckless, more dangerous with every move. The first sign came when my solar panels mysteriously failed one Tuesday morning. The inverter flashed error codes. The batteries were dead. My electrician buddy Jake found the wiring had been deliberately loosened enough to cripple the system without obvious damage. "Marcus, this is professional sabotage," he said, snapping photos. "Whoever did this knows electrical systems. They wanted disruption without leaving fingerprints." But Jake was sharper than Karen counted on. After the first incident, he'd hidden a security camera near the panel. 2 nights later, it caught her in the act slinking across my property at 3 a.m. with a screwdriver and wire cutters. The footage was crystal clear. Karen Cromwell, president of the HOA and supposed community leader, vandalizing private property in the dead of night. Next came my boat dock. I left for groceries and returned to find my boat adrift across the lake. The heavy chains securing it had been cut clean with bolt cutters, metal shavings still scattered on the dock. That boat, Pop's pride, a 78 base boat that still ran smooth, was now scratched from the rocky shore. It felt like desecration. Her boldest strike was against my septic system. Just weeks after passing inspection, it suddenly backed up. The stench was unbearable, a toxic mix of sewage and chemicals that burned your eyes from 50 feet away. The emergency tech confirmed the system had been poisoned with industrial-strength drain cleaner, killing all the beneficial bacteria. "This wasn't random," he said, holding chemical-tainted soil samples. "Someone used commercial-grade acids, expensive, specialized stuff. The repair cost me $3,200, but more importantly, it gave investigators forensic proof of intentional sabotage." While I fought sewage backups, Karen launched a media blitz. Fake accounts flooded social media with posts about my violations and my property endangering the neighborhood. The bots were laughably obvious generic profiles posting identical complaints within minutes. At the same time, she turned the pressure dial on me personally. Deputy Chad Cromwell, her brother, began cruising past my cabin 4 or 5 times daily, lingering long enough to make his surveillance clear. Sometimes he parked in my driveway, running plates on every visitor. Building inspectors suddenly found violations on work that had already passed inspection. The fire marshal got anonymous reports of hazards that didn't exist. Environmental services received tips about illegal dumping on land they'd already cleared. It was bureaucracy as a weapon, death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to bleed me dry. And I wasn't the only target anymore. Karen widened her attacks to those helping me. Jake's contractor license went under review. Bill Carter, the retired judge advising me, was hit with a complaint to the state bar. The VFW Post faced a surprise inspection threatening their bingo nights. Even the Historical Society was slapped with zoning complaints. The message was clear: stand with Marcus Henley, and you'll pay. The pressure was relentless. Every morning brought fresh crises, new bureaucratic battles. Stress sat on my tongue like metal, but Karen's unraveling also gave us chances. Each act of sabotage, each smear campaign, added more evidence. Even her own allies started pulling away as she grew more erratic. The Attorney General's office kept watch carefully, assembling a bulletproof case while Karen dug herself deeper. "This is textbook escalation," Torres explained. "When criminals feel trapped, they spiral. And those reckless moves give us what we need." She was right. Karen was walking straight into the net, one sabotaged solar panel at a time. Her last move, though, nearly worked. Through her husband's political ties, she learned that I wasn't meeting just any state official. I was meeting Attorney General Patricia Williamson herself. Instead of retreating, Karen doubled down. Her plan was twisted brilliance: flip the script and paint herself as the victim of a political conspiracy. claiming the state's top prosecutor was targeting her family for partisan gain. If she managed to capture herself on camera exposing government corruption from inside my cabin, she could completely reshape the story, casting herself as a fearless whistler taking a stand against abuse of power. The first glimpse of this new strategy appeared on social media. She had contacted Government Accounting Watch, one of those blogger networks known for amplifying tales of bureaucratic excess. Her pitch was flawless. A small-town HOA president pursued by overreaching officials simply because her husband was aligned with the rival political party. The headline that spread just 3 days before my scheduled meeting was clear. Asterisk local family attacked, state investigation used to silence political opposition. Asterisk the framing painted me as a shadowy deep state agent, conspiring with crooked prosecutors to destroy an innocent household. Outrage poured into the comment sections from people who had never even heard of our lake community, yet were absolutely convinced Karen was being crushed by partisan prosecutors. She had tapped into that strong current of anti-government resentment, running through rural America, reinventing Hearst as a martyr of political persecution. But her boldest move was the livestream plan. She arranged to broadcast her confrontation with the Attorney General in real time, framing it as citizen journalism, government corruption laid bare on camera. Her scheme was simple: storm into my cabin during the meeting, film everything, and let her followers spread the evidence as undeniable proof of misconduct. What she didn't realize was that we were already watching her every step. Agent Torres had secured warrants for her phone and social media weeks earlier. We knew about her blogger outreach, her livestream setup, even the lines she'd scripted for her so-called spontaneous ambush. This is ideal, Torres explained during our last coordination session. She'd be committing multiple live on video while handing us her motives in real time. We couldn't have designed it better. The irony was almost poetic. Karen thought she was baiting a trap for us, when in reality she was about toeing into the most thoroughly documented arrest in HOA history. Meanwhile, her support system was crumbling. The other board members had quietly backed away once the missing funds became too obvious. Her husband was entangled in his own ethics investigation and could no longer shield her politically. Even Deputy Chad had been reassigned after internal affairs questioned his lax response to vandalism complaints. But Karen was far beyond reason then. The stress of hiding her fraud while fending off multiple probes had pushed her over the edge. Classic signs of unraveling were everywhere: paranoia about neighbors spying on her, threatening calls to Tonyon, who had backed me, a conviction that every person was part of a vast conspiracy against her. The night before the Attorney General's arrival, chefing for families with menacing warnings about consequences if they kept cooperating with state authorities. Every call was recorded, each one added to the growing pile of evidence: witness intimidation, criminal conspiracy, escalating threats. That final evening I sat on Pop's porch, watching the sun melt into the lake, gold and crimson dancing on the water's surface. The haunting calls of loons echoed across the shoreline, reminding me exactly why this place was worth defending. Tomorrow would decide whether I could spend my retirement in peace or spend years locked in courtroom battles with Karen's endless apples from prison. The cabin felt different that night, not just because of the hidden cameras and listening devices, but because it had become the center of something larger than a property dispute. This was about proving that small-time operators with political connections couldn't terrorize entire neighborhoods without facing justice. I opened Pop's weathered leather Bible and reread the verse he had underlined about David facing Goliath. In the margin he had scribbled, asterisk, sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for more than himself. Asterisk, the morning would bring Karen's final, reckless gamble. She would charge through that door convinced she was about to annihilate her enemies, never realizing she was about to annihilate herself. The stage was set, cameras ready, law enforcement in position. All we had to do was wait for Karen to deliver the finale to her own downfall. The taste of anticipation blended with morning coffee like nothing I'd ever experienced. Attorney General Patricia Williamson was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of some imposing career politician, she was a grounded woman in her 50s, who reminded me of my high school principal, tough but fair, sharp eyes missing nothing. She arrived at exactly 9 a.m., thermos of coffee in one hand, briefcase of evidence in the other. "Mr. Henley," she said, settling into Pop's old recliner as if it belonged to her. "Your records have allowed you to build cases against HOA corruption networks in 6 counties. What you've uncovered here isn't just local fraud, it's part of a statewide pattern of organized theft. We were deep in discussion about charges when the unmistakable roar of Karen's Escalade tore up the driveway, gravel spraying like she was in a chase scene. Car doors slammed. Voices barked directions about camera angles and audio. She had brought her entire social media crew for what she believed would be her grand victory. Showtime, Agent Torres whispered into her earpiece from behind the woodshed. The Attorney General didn't even pause. She calmly kept jotting notes as Karen's voice grew louder outside, winding herself into a frenzy for her livestream audience. This is it, folks. Karen's voice rang out clear. We're about to reveal the corruption targeting our family. The state's Attorney General is secretly meeting with our harasser, plotting even more persecution. The sharp clack of her designer heels across my porch sounded like a countdown to catastrophe, hers, not mine. Then crash, the door burst open, splinters flying as if she'd used a battering ram. The Attorney General's coffee cup hit the floor, shattering in perfect punctuation. Karen burst into my living room, phone held aloft, live streaming the chaos without a shred of awareness that she'd just committed trespassing, breaking and entering, and even assault in front of the state's chief prosecutor, no less. I demand to know why the Attorney General is secretly meeting with this man, she shrieked, brandishing her phone like it was a weapon. This is government harassment, political persecution. I have rights, the expression on her face when Attorney General Patricia Williamson rose calmly and presented her credentials was nothing short of priceless. Karen's stream caught the precise instant the truth hit her. Her eyes went wide, her body froze, and terror locked her in place. Mrs. Cromwell, Williamson said in that cool, commanding tone that probably made seasoned criminals break out in a sweat. I am Patricia Williamson, Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and both my office and your own live stream are recording every second of it. And sure enough, Karen's phone was still broadcasting live. Her devoted followers watched their so-called crusader unravel in real time, stammering and incoherent. The comments flooded with disbelief as her audience realized they'd been backing a fraud who had just blown up her own reputation on camera. I'm the authority here. This is my neighborhood. I have jurisdiction. She sputtered, clinging to the fantasy that her HOA badge somehow outweighed state law. That's when FBI Agent Torres stepped through my open doorway, flanked by 2 more federal officers. Mrs. Cromwell, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and criminal harassment. And thanks to your live stream, we've got your confession in front of about 3,000 witnesses. The snap of handcuffs echoed through my cabin like the final chapter of a book. Her phone clattered to the floor, still streaming her downfall. To an audience that had shifted from angry supporters to horrified voyeurs. Karen, I said, rising from Pop's old couch with a satisfied grin, meet the state's Attorney General. She's been eager to go over your bookkeeping habits. Neighbors who'd gathered outside stood frozen on my porch, watching in disbelief as the woman who had terrorized us for months was read her Miranda rights in my living room. Mrs. Patterson, who'd driven down from her daughter's house just for this moment, cried openly. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived right on cue for the perp walk. Karen stumbled in cuffs past the dock she'd tried to have torn down, past the solar panels she'd called a hazard, past the cabin she'd labeled an eyesore. Her pearl-white Escalade, complete with Rule 1 vanity plates, was hooked up to a tow truck as evidence in the fraud case. The live stream ended with her voice echoing across the lake. This isn't over. My husband will fix this. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, but we did. We knew exactly who we were dealing with. A criminal. And criminals go to prison. Watching her sentenced 3 months later was like opening gifts on Christmas morning. Federal Judge Michael Harrison didn't just throw the book at her, he launched the entire library. 3 years in federal prison, $340,000 in restitution to cheated homeowners, and a lifetime ban from ever serving on an HOA board again. Her husband, Robert, didn't escape either. Investigators found he had been abusing his role as Democratic Party treasurer, feeding her insider details about zoning and development. He resigned in disgrace and picked up an 18-month sentence for conspiracy and abuse of office. As for the HOA, dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee. In its place, we built the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association, emphasis on volunteer. No forced fees, no citation authority, No egomaniac presidents, just neighbors working together to protect our little paradise, and my role in unraveling the corruption. It earned me something I never expected: whistleblower compensation. Turns out when you help the feds recover hundreds of thousands in stolen funds, they cut you in. That $45,000 check felt like payback for every sleepless night Karen caused me. But the real reward was what came after. Attorney General Williamson used our case to push through new legislation, the Henley Act. It requires every HOA in the state to undergo yearly independent audits and makes harassment-based property schemes a criminal offense. Other counties followed our lead, prosecuting fraud rings that had been running the same racket. Karen's little empire turned out to be part of a much larger criminal network targeting rural homeowners across 5 states. The FBI's final report tied more than 24 cases to the same scheme. Families who'd been driven out began returning. The Hendersons bought a new cabin just 2 lots down from me after their bogus property devaluation was voided. Mrs. Patterson moved back from Florida and hosted an all-night block party. Property values didn't just bounce back, they soared. Turns out when you remove corruption and harassment, people actually want to live here. Who would have guessed? The changes went deeper than the law. Our lake became a model for sustainable living. The same off-grid cabin Karen once tried to get condemned now hosts monthly tour for people curious about solar power and renewable energy. The state's environmental agency even featured us in its showcase program. I used part of my whistleblower payout to launch the Pop's Legacy Scholarship, $500 grants for kids entering trade schools. Pop always believed honest work with your hands was the foundation of life. Helping the next generation felt right. Our annual Clearwater Lake Festival has grown into a regional hit, raising money for veterans housing. Last year alone, we funded 3 tiny home projects for homeless vets. The air is filled with barbecue, smoke, children laughing, and neighbors reconnecting, replacing the toxicity Karen left behind. But my favorite part? The peace. Right now, I'm sitting on Pop's porch, watching the sunset paint the lake gold and purple. Loons call across the water, echoing off the hills where Pop taught me to fish decades ago. My solar panels hum quietly on the roof, powering a life that finally belongs to me again. No more threatening letters, no more inspections, no more stilettos clicking across my dock at dawn. Just waves against the wood and the knowledge that sometimes, if you're stubborn and righteous enough, David really can beat Goliath. The Netflix crew finished filming here last month. HOA Hell: How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire premieres next spring. They paid me enough to build a guest cabin where other victims of HOA tyranny can stay while they fight their own battles. Because Karen wasn't the only one. HOA tyrants are everywhere in America, bullying seniors, bleeding homeowners dry. But now there's a blueprint for fighting back. And now I want to hear from you. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments. You're not alone. These stories matter. Hit subscribe if you want more tales of ordinary people standing up to corrupt systems, because I've got plenty more. Next week, I'll tell you about the city councilman who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck until some of the owner's Pentagon buddies showed up. Thanks for joining us on HOA Stories. If this one made you cheer, cringe, or both, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next wild ride.